spring of 1883 in Colorado was merciless. The wind tore across the high plains, lifting dust and patches of lingering snow from the slopes of the Rockies. Evelyn Mackenzie trudged along the narrow trail toward the settlement, her small bag heavy with the few belongings she had brought. She had left her family's farm behind after the accident with the horse, the one she had tried to save, which had fallen, destroying part of the harvest and leaving her family without means to survive. A chill ran through her as she walked, the weight of failure pressing on her chest, yet she could not stop. The town lay ahead, small and almost hidden at the base of the mountains, its wooden structures emerging faintly through the haze of dust and wind. Each step she took on the rocky path made a sharp, echoing crack that seemed too loud against the lonely quiet of the valleys. Her heart pounded, each beat marking the rhythm of uncertainty and exhaustion. Far off, near the riverbank, a figure appeared. James Harper, a solitary cowboy, moved among a handful of grazing horses. His posture was still and attentive, eyes fixed on the horizon as if waiting for something that had yet to arrive. There was an odd tension in the way he stood, rooted to the earth like one of the ancient pines surrounding the river. Evelyn's gaze caught his silhouette, and for a moment she felt a shiver of apprehension mingled with hope, as if the course of her life might pivot in this very instant. The wind tossed strands of her hair across her face, and she brushed them away, stepping carefully over stones and roots, trying not to stumble. Every breath was thick with dust and the sharp scent of snow melting in the sun, a mixture that made the air feel alive and fragile all at once. Her thoughts drifted, fleeting and fragmented. The accident, the disappointment, the long, lonely nights on the empty farm, all of it pressed into her mind, threatening to sap the small strength she had left. And yet something about the man by the river offered a strange counterbalance. There was no warmth yet, no promise, only the quiet presence of another human being who seemed grounded, unhurried, untouchable by the wind or the dust. Evelyn's steps quickened instinctively, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, by the unspoken pull of possibility. The uneven path forced her to concentrate on each footfall, the small stones biting into the soles of her boots, the loose dirt sliding beneath her weight. Each moment stretched, elongated by the stillness around her, until the distance between them seemed almost impossible to measure. As she drew closer, the wind shifted, carrying the faint metallic scent of the river and the musky aroma of horses. James moved slightly, a tilt of the head, an acknowledgement of her approach without words, a signal that he had seen her. Evelyn's chest tightened, a mix of anticipation and the old familiar fear of rejection. She imagined 1,000 scenarios. He could turn away, he could ignore her, or he could offer the small, silent recognition she longed for. Her pace slowed instinctively, uncertainty mingling with the faint hope rising in her chest. The mountains around them seemed to lean closer, their shadows stretching like silent witnesses over the plain. By the time she reached the edge of the riverbank, the figure of James Harper had taken on clarity and solidity, a contrast to the wavering shapes of the distant town. The horses shifted, ears flicking, but made no sound beyond the gentle rustle of hooves in the grass. Evelyn paused a few paces away, feeling the pulse of the river beneath the ice, the cold water reflecting shards of the sunlight. In that suspended space, the wind, the mountains, and the river seemed to hold their breath alongside her. For the first time in many weeks, the weight of past failures began to lift slightly, replaced by the fragile, unspoken possibility that her journey might not end in despair. The world held its silence, tense and expectant, as the two figures regarded each other across the short distance, caught in a moment that promised a shift, a quiet turning of fate. James agreed to take Evelyn in on his small farm, nestled in the valley between rolling hills. The house was modest, constructed of weathered wood, its walls bearing the subtle aroma of pine resin and the faint, warm scent of bread that James baked every morning. Evelyn stepped inside with cautious relief, the silence of the home a soft contrast to the wind and dust of the plains she had left behind. For the first time in many weeks, a fragile calm settled over her, delicate as ice under the spring sun, ready to melt at the slightest pressure. The room smelled of earth and wood, of smoke from the hearth, and of the faint traces of James's presence, a grounded human order she had almost forgotten existed. She explored slowly, feeling the grooves in the floorboards under her boots, the uneven texture of the walls, the weight and comfort of the furniture. Each small sound seemed to belong to her now, each shadow a quiet companion rather than a threat. She quickly set about finding ways to be useful, her movements cautious but determined. She swept the floor, carrying water from the nearby well, tidied the sparse furniture, and learned the rhythm of daily chores. The work was hard, her hands blistered and her back ached from unfamiliar labor, yet each task brought a strange satisfaction. She learned to feed the animals, brushing the horses and checking the cattle for signs of illness. With each chore, she felt a faint shift within her, a sense that she was no longer a visitor merely tolerated, but a participant in the quiet, essential order of the farm. Her fear of failure began to ebb, replaced by the quiet pride of usefulness. James observed her without words, his presence a steady, unspoken guide. Occasionally, he would gesture, pointing to a task or demonstrating a movement, but his instruction was measured, never intrusive. Evelyn found herself absorbing his rhythm, learning without the pressure of expectation, gradually understanding the subtle language of the farm, the sound of water moving in the trough, the tension in a horse's muscles, the way the wind signaled the approach of a storm. Every day, she felt herself more rooted, the edges of her old fear softening with each passing hour. Evenings were a time of reflection and quiet observation. Evelyn would sit near the hearth, her hands worn and calloused, watching the shadows dance across the wooden walls. The fading light through the window cast long shapes over the floor, and she felt the presence of the world outside mingle with the warmth inside. In those moments, the sense of fragility that had accompanied her journey began to dissolve, replaced by the slow, steady pulse of life on the farm. She started to feel a small but growing attachment to the place, an understanding that she was not simply passing through, but could belong here. In the quiet of the valley, surrounded by hills and the distant peaks of the Rockies, Evelyn felt for the first time in many weeks that she could pause, that she could breathe, and that perhaps, for the first time in a long while, she wanted to stay. The summer arrived with an unforgiving heat that pressed down on the valley, baking the soil and wilting the sparse grasses that stretched across the farm. The pastures, once lush and green, had dried to a brittle brown, and the horses began to falter under the relentless sun. Evelyn moved among them with careful, deliberate steps, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing against her chest. Each animal she approached carried a silent plea, a quiet need for attention, and she responded with patience and attentiveness, letting her instincts guide her. She had never worked with such urgency, yet there was a rhythm to her actions, a subtle harmony between her movements and the living creatures she tended. She examined hooves for cracks, brushed tangled manes, and whispered to the animals in tones that seemed to soothe their discomfort. In the early mornings, she ventured along the riverbank, testing the water, collecting herbs and preparing poultices from the foliage she had learned to recognize. Leaves crushed under her fingers released faint scents, some sharp and bitter, others sweet and earthy, each chosen for a precise purpose. She carefully mixed them, her hands steady despite the sweat dripping from her brow, crafting remedies with a focus born from necessity and concern. James watched from a distance, his posture relaxed yet attentive, acknowledging her efforts without intrusion. There was a quiet pride in his gaze, an understanding that Evelyn's intuition and dedication were more than sufficient to meet the challenges that summer had imposed. The work demanded constant attention. Each day the sun rose with a merciless glare, and Evelyn felt the toll on her body as her arms ached and her back burned from lifting feed, drawing water, and tending the livestock. Yet the struggle brought a deeper awareness, a connection to the land and to James that she had never experienced before. Their movements fell into a silent choreography, a dance of necessity and understanding. A glance, a tilt of the head, the shift of weight from one foot to another communicated volumes. Words became unnecessary, the trust between them growing in the unspoken space of mutual effort. Evenings brought brief relief. The heat of the day subsided into a gentle breeze that rustled through the distant pines and lifted the dust from the dirt paths. Evelyn and James would sit on the porch, shoulders relaxed against the worn wooden railing, their eyes tracing the horizon where the sun melted into streaks of crimson and gold. Each sunset was a moment suspended in time, a pause in the relentless demands of survival. In the quiet, Evelyn felt the gentle tether of trust grow stronger, woven from shared labor and mutual reliance. She sensed that James recognized her not only for her skills or her perseverance, but for her presence itself, for the essence of who she was beneath the toil and fear. Night descended gradually, bringing shadows that stretched across the farm. Crickets sang in the fields, the river murmured softly, and the animals settled into the calm rhythm of darkness. Evelyn lingered in the porch's warmth, absorbing the tranquility, aware of the subtle but undeniable bond forming between her and James. The heat of the summer day had tested them both, but it had also forged a quiet resilience and understanding. Their companionship no longer rested on necessity alone. It had grown into a shared acknowledgement of strength, of care, of the capacity to endure and adapt together. In those long, quiet evenings, Evelyn realized that this was more than survival or mere cooperation. The trust between them carried a promise of something deeper, something unspoken yet palpable, an intimacy born from facing adversity side by side. Every small gesture of assistance, every careful observation, every moment of silent comprehension layered upon the next, building a foundation that neither needed to name. The farm, the land, the animals, and the endless sky became the backdrop for this connection, as natural and vital as the summer heat itself. Evelyn felt a stirring hope, fragile yet insistent, that life here might offer her not only a refuge, but a bond capable of sustaining her in ways she had not dared to imagine before. As darkness fully settled over the valley, the stars beginning to pierce the black velvet sky, Evelyn understood that the summer's trials had revealed more than the limits of her endurance. They had revealed the depth of trust that could exist between two people, a quiet, steadfast trust that required no words, only shared experience, patience, and care. In the stillness of the night, she allowed herself to imagine the days to come, feeling for the first time in a long while that she was not merely passing through this place, but becoming a part of it, intertwined with the life and presence of the man who had quietly become her companion, her anchor, and perhaps the first true constant in her unsettled world.
Rumors had drifted into the small town like a sudden, chilling wind. They traveled quickly through dusty streets and narrow alleys, whispered behind shutters, and exchanged in furtive glances, carrying the weight of old misfortune tied to Evelyn's name. Her past, a chapter she had tried to leave behind, surged forward with renewed intensity. Faces that had once been neutral now held the glimmer of judgment, eyes darting toward her and then away, leaving her feeling exposed and fragile. Each hushed comment, each sidelong glance pierced through the tentative peace she had begun to build, dragging her back to memories of failure, loss, and helplessness on her family's farm. The sensation was immediate and visceral, a cold pressure gripping her chest, twisting and constricting. Evelyn's mind replayed the day of the accident over and over, the panicked neighing of the horse, the crash of broken timbers, the weight of helplessness as she watched her family's livelihood crumble. Shame, a familiar companion she thought she had left behind, returned with renewed force. She felt small, unworthy, a shadow of the person she had begun to trust herself to become. The valley, once a sanctuary, seemed suddenly alien, every tree and ridge whispering echoes of doubt and condemnation. James noticed her withdrawal almost immediately. He had always observed her with quiet patience, but now there was a sharpened intensity in his gaze, a protective vigilance that went beyond simple concern. He positioned himself between Evelyn and the world in subtle, unspoken ways, intercepting curious stares with calm authority and asserting the boundary of their shared space without a word. If a neighbor lingered too long in judgment, James's presence alone was enough to redirect attention, to remind the town that Evelyn was not alone, that she did not have to bear the weight of their scrutiny by herself. Evelyn watched him in these moments, a mix of relief and wonder swelling inside her. No one had ever offered her such steadfast protection, such acceptance of her entirety without expectation or evaluation. For the first time, she felt seen not as a collection of mistakes or as a cautionary tale, but as a person capable of resilience, care, and contribution. The realization was subtle, blooming like dawn after a long night, and it filled her with cautious hope. She could feel her chest expand with new strength, her posture straighten under the weight of recognition and respect rather than shame. Days passed and the town's whispers began to lose their sharpness, dulled by the quiet strength Evelyn exhibited. She worked alongside James, tending the farm, caring for the animals, and gradually reclaiming her confidence in small, deliberate acts. She mended fences with steady hands, collected firewood with determined purpose, and navigated the rough terrain of the valley with the ease of someone reclaiming territory once thought lost. With each task, her mind reinforced the quiet truth that she belonged, that her efforts mattered, and that her worth was not measured by the accidents of the past, but by the integrity and care she brought to the present. Evenings on the porch became a refuge, moments where she could release tension and let the world's judgment drift past without touching her. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying the scent of snow meltwater and earth warmed by the sun, and Evelyn allowed herself to breathe fully, feeling the tension drain from her shoulders. In James's quiet companionship, she discovered the profound comfort of unwavering acceptance, a reassurance that who she was mattered more than what she had lost or failed to protect. Every glance he offered, every shared task completed together, reinforced her growing sense of self, weaving a network of trust and mutual respect that no rumor could unravel. Evelyn began to carry herself differently, moving with a grace that emerged from inner steadiness rather than conscious effort. Her eyes, once wary and downcast, now held a subtle light, reflecting confidence and clarity. She explored the valley with renewed curiosity, observing the intricacies of the river's flow, the patterns of clouds above the mountains, the small creatures that scuttled among the underbrush. Each discovery, each moment of observation strengthened her connection to this place and to her own evolving identity. She realized that she was no longer defined by the misfortune of her past. She was defined by the choices she made, by the care she invested in the present, and by the steadfast companionship of the man who had silently stood by her side. At night, Evelyn often lay awake under the blanket of stars, the valley quiet except for the distant murmur of the river. She allowed herself to reflect on the journey that had brought her here, acknowledging the shadows of the past without letting them dominate her thoughts. The shame that had once consumed her now felt like a distant echo, softened by the warmth of trust and acceptance she had found. She understood, with a clarity that brought tears to her eyes, that she had finally discovered a place where she could exist fully as herself, where her decisions mattered more than the accidents of history, and where her life could be measured by the resilience, care, and connection she nurtured day by day. As winter began to hint at its approach, the valley transformed into a quiet, resilient world, and Evelyn felt herself becoming part of it in ways that were both tangible and spiritual. Every day she confronted the past, not as a source of fear, but as a marker of the distance she had traveled and the strength she had cultivated. Her steps were confident on the uneven ground, her hands steady in labor, and her heart increasingly open to the possibilities of trust and belonging. She realized that the shadows of the past would always exist, but they no longer held dominion over her spirit. The life she was building with James was rooted in presence, care, and unspoken understanding. And in that life she had found not just refuge, but power, affirmation, and a sense of true home.
Evelyn understood that the valley, with its rugged mountains and sprawling plains, mirrored her own journey, shaped by hardship, tested by adversity, yet capable of resilience and growth. Each sunrise painted new possibilities across the landscape, and with every step she took, she carried the lessons of the past while embracing the promise of the future. She felt the solidity of her choices, the value of her presence, and the rare unspoken bond that connected her to James, a bond forged in silence, trust, and mutual recognition. In the quiet moments between labor and rest, Evelyn allowed herself to acknowledge the profound truth she had discovered. She was seen, she was accepted, and she had finally arrived in a place where her life could unfold free from the suffocating weight of old mistakes. Autumn settled over the valley with a golden haze, painting the fields and forests in muted amber and rust. Evelyn awoke each morning to the crisp scent of fallen leaves, mixed with the lingering warmth of sun-baked earth. She moved through the farm with a quiet purpose, tending to the garden with careful hands, watching as seedlings pushed through soil that she had nurtured with patience and attention. Every row of vegetables, every sprouting plant, was a small triumph, a testament to her growing skill and understanding of the rhythms of the land. She learned to anticipate the needs of the soil, to notice the subtle shifts in weather, to read the signals of the plants as they responded to sun, wind, and rain. Her knowledge was no longer theoretical. It was lived, practiced, and inseparable from her daily existence. James worked beside her with a steady, measured presence. He built pens and enclosures for the animals, repaired fences, and handled the stubborn, skittish livestock with the quiet authority of someone who had spent years in communion with the land. Evelyn observed him, absorbing not just his techniques, but the patience and respect he carried for every creature. Gradually, her own confidence with the animals grew. She learned to calm a restless horse with a gentle touch, to coax shy calves towards safety, to anticipate the needs of each creature before they became urgent. In these moments, Evelyn understood that care was both practical and intimate, a dialogue of gestures, attentiveness, and presence rather than words. The rhythm of their days became intertwined. Dawn found them in the fields tending crops and animals. Midday brought rest and quiet observation, sometimes under the shade of an old oak or beside the gentle flow of the river. Evenings closed with the soft hush of twilight, where they would sit together on the porch, their bodies exhausted, but their minds at ease. Words were rarely needed, yet each glance, each gesture communicated more than conversation ever could. A shared task completed successfully carried with it a subtle acknowledgement of mutual respect and reliance. When Evelyn handed James a tool or offered water for a horse, there was a silent understanding that their efforts were aligned, that each act of care and labor was part of a larger shared purpose. As the days passed, an unspoken closeness took root between them. It was not dramatic or consuming, but steady and profound. Evelyn felt the warmth of James's presence in small, everyday moments, the way he moved through the farm with ease, the way he adjusted her work without intrusive words, the careful attention he paid to her safety and comfort. Similarly, James felt a quiet shift within himself, a recognition that Evelyn's presence brought a completeness he had not known was missing. He observed her determination, her attentiveness to the smallest details, the way her eyes would light with satisfaction when a task was done well, and he understood that the farm was no longer just a landscape of labor, it was a place transformed by shared effort and connection. The subtle intimacy grew in parallel with the life they cultivated around them. Evelyn's hands became skilled at planting, pruning, and tending, while James's careful construction of enclosures and repairs provided a secure environment for both animals and crops. They moved through their work in tandem, anticipating each other's actions, learning to balance strength with gentleness, decisiveness with patience. In these silent patterns, a profound emotional intimacy emerged, woven from gestures, shared glances, and the rhythm of cooperative labor. Evelyn began to feel that her existence had resonance beyond herself, that she mattered not only for her own survival and growth, but for the life they were building together. Each day of tending, repairing, observing, and nurturing became an affirmation of their partnership. Evenings were perhaps the most intimate. As the sun sank behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, they would sit in quiet reflection. The world around them softened in the twilight, leaves rustling in the gentle wind, the distant river murmuring over stones, the farm bathed in fading gold. Their silences were not empty. They were rich with awareness of each other's presence, filled with the subtle exchanges of trust, care, and unspoken affection. Evelyn could feel the weight of James's gaze resting on her with a protective gentleness, a recognition that was neither possessive nor demanding, but affirming and steady. In return, James felt the calm and certainty that Evelyn's diligence, empathy, and attention brought into his life. The farm was alive with their shared energy, a tangible manifestation of a partnership that neither needed to be spoken to exist. Gradually, the boundaries between their individual labors blurred, and they moved as one through the farm. Evelyn learned to read James's gestures and anticipations, adjusting her own movements to align with his, while he, in turn, grew attuned to her subtle cues and rhythms. This silent synchronization brought a profound sense of unity, a shared heartbeat that resonated through the work of their hands and the patterns of their day. Each sowing of seed, each repaired fence, each careful tending of an animal was infused with the quiet intimacy that had become the foundation of their relationship. Their connection was not sudden or flashy, but steady, enduring, and tangible in every aspect of life on the farm. As the autumn sun climbed higher and then fell lower over the mountains, Evelyn and James found themselves increasingly aware of the emotional texture that had grown between them. There were fleeting moments of touch, the brushing of hands as they passed tools, the steadying presence of an arm on a horse's flank, the simple act of sharing water or food. Each of these small gestures carried weight, embedding trust, warmth, and a mutual recognition that transcended spoken language. Their emotional intimacy was like a river beneath the surface, quiet but powerful, shaping the contours of their daily life and creating a foundation that could support the inevitable challenges ahead. Evelyn felt her heart expand in ways she had never known. She realized that her life was no longer solitary or reactive. It was shared, anchored in trust, care, and the subtle, constant presence of another person who valued her existence and choices. Similarly, James recognized that the quiet bond they were building had the depth of loyalty, respect, and companionship, forming a partnership that neither had anticipated but both needed. Together, they cultivated not only the land and animals around them, but also a tender, unspoken love that grew steadily, quietly, and with purpose. By the end of the season, the farm was flourishing, a reflection of their joint efforts, and so was the relationship between Evelyn and James. The connection between them had become a living, breathing presence, interwoven into every aspect of their daily routine. Every chore, every harvest, every moment of observation or care was imbued with the awareness of their shared journey, and with it, the understanding that life was richer, fuller, and more meaningful when built together. In the quiet culmination of their autumn days, Evelyn recognized the profound truth that love could exist without declaration, that intimacy could thrive in silence, and that a partnership grounded in mutual respect, shared labor, and unwavering presence could become the most enduring and transformative force in a lifetime. Winter had descended upon Colorado, draping the valley and the farm in a thick, unbroken blanket of snow. The mountains rose in quiet majesty around them, their peaks stark against a pale winter sky, and the wind whispered through the evergreens, carrying a crisp, frozen scent that spoke of stillness and endurance. Evelyn moved carefully along the paths she and James had worn through the snow, her boots leaving prints that would soon be covered by drifting flurries. She paused to look at the fields, now resting under the winter frost, and felt the weight of years, labor, and transformation settle around her. The farm had grown, not just in its structures or livestock, but in the invisible architecture of patience, care, and love that had been built day by day, season by season. James joined her, his presence steady and familiar, a constant against the quiet of the snowy landscape. Together they observed the life they had cultivated, the barns filled with well-fed animals, the fenced pastures now dormant under ice and snow, and the rows of fruit trees and garden beds that would sleep until spring returned. Their children, grown now, moved through the farm with the same sense of responsibility and connection, assisting with chores, tending to animals, and maintaining the spaces that had once been their playgrounds. Evelyn and James watched with a quiet pride, understanding that their labor had extended beyond themselves, leaving a tangible legacy in the hands and hearts of the next generation. The days were short, the sun lingering low in the sky before retreating behind the western ridges, but each moment carried with it a profound sense of completion and fulfillment. Evelyn reflected on how far she had come, from the fragile, frightened girl who had wandered into the valley, uncertain and alone, to a woman whose knowledge, skill, and care had left a lasting mark on the land and the people around her. She moved among the animals, brushing a horse's coat, checking the feed, and ensuring warmth and safety, each act a continuation of the quiet devotion that had defined her life here. James moved alongside her, attending to repairs, guiding the children, and managing the rhythms of farm life with the steady patience that had always been his way. In their combined efforts, the farm was more than a home or a livelihood. It was a testament to endurance, resilience, and the unspoken love that bound them together. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the snow, Evelyn and James paused to take in the valley. Smoke rose from the chimneys, curling into the cold air, carrying with it the scent of warmth, bread, and hearth. The animals huddled in the barns and pens, the children settled into their tasks, and the wind moved softly through the trees, creating a hushed symphony of winter. Every element of the farm, the soil, the buildings, the animals, the people, stood as a record of their years of work, sacrifice, and devotion. Evelyn could feel the weight of continuity in her chest, the quiet, powerful knowledge that the choices they had made, the care they had taken, and the love they had nurtured were leaving an imprint that would endure long after they were gone.
Winter also brought moments of reflection. Evelyn and James would stand on the porch together, shoulders nearly touching, and watch the fading light stretch across the valley. They thought of the storms they had weathered, the hardships endured, and the small victories that had built the life they now inhabited. The past, with all its pain and missteps, felt distant and softened by the passage of time, no longer a source of shame or fear, but a backdrop that had shaped them into the people they had become. In the silence between them, there was no need for words. Their shared history, their shared labor, and their shared love were sufficient to fill the space with meaning. Even the smallest details of the farm seemed to carry the weight of their legacy. The worn paths through the snow marked the routines of daily life. The sturdy fences testified to countless repairs made with diligence. The barns sheltered generations of animals, each cared for with careful hands and attention. Every structure, every field, every corner of the land had been touched by their presence, shaped by their decisions, and maintained with steady love. Evelyn knew that their work was not merely practical, but also symbolic, a testament to the endurance of human care and connection. The land itself seemed to acknowledge this, resting in quiet beauty beneath the snow, while quietly preserving the memory of those who had nurtured it. In these moments of winter stillness, Evelyn and James also acknowledged the depth of their bond. The love between them had grown silently over years of shared labor, trust, and quiet support. It was a love not announced by grand gestures or words, but present in every action, glance, and gesture of care. They recognized that their lives were intertwined in ways that went beyond simple partnership. They were co-creators of a world that reflected their values, their resilience, and their capacity to love. Each day of tending, building, and nurturing had strengthened the invisible threads connecting them, and in the cold clarity of winter, that connection felt unbreakable, enduring, and sacred.
As night fell and stars appeared over the snowy ridges, Evelyn and James felt the profound weight of accomplishment and continuity. Their farm, their family, and their shared life stood as evidence that care, patience, and steadfastness could shape a world worth living in. Their story was not one of spectacle or legend, but of quiet persistence, tender devotion, and unwavering courage. It was a story that would continue in the hands of their children, in the rhythms of the farm, and in the memories etched into the valley itself. Every footprint in the snow, every well-tended animal, every harvest preserved for winter was part of this legacy, a reminder that life built with intention and love leaves a mark far beyond its beginnings. And as the wind whispered through the pines and the valley settled into the peaceful hush of night, Evelyn and James shared a moment of silent acknowledgement. Their lives, their labors, and their love had coalesced into something lasting and meaningful. In the stillness, they recognized that the past no longer bound them, but their choices and care had created a reality rooted in presence, purpose, and enduring connection. The farm was thriving, their children were learning, and the land reflected the work of hands guided by heart. Their legacy was secure, a living testament to resilience, love, and quiet courage. In the fading glow of the sunset, they knew that the story of their lives would continue not only in their own hearts, but in the hearts of those who would follow, carrying forward the lessons of steadfastness, compassion, and shared life.